Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll be discussing about the first chapter of Standard 11, that is, the living world. In today's session, we'll be covering up two topics. The first one is what is living and diversity of life on the earth. We see various kinds of things around us like plants, animals, table, chair, desk, pen, pencil, birds, insects, etc. Out of these whole lot of things, how are we supposed to differentiate the living things from the non-living things? There are certain characteristics that differentiate the living organisms from the non-living objects. The first one is growth. All living organisms grow. Growth is by a process called cell division. In unicellular organisms, the cell grows in size. And in some cases, the cell divides to form new individuals. So, growth and reproduction are inclusive events in case of unicellular organisms. But that is not the case in multicellular organisms. Cell division leads to growth of the individual, but it does not lead to reproduction. Therefore, growth and reproduction are exclusive events in case of multicellular organisms. Plants and animals also grow differently. Plants grow throughout their lifespan in certain regions called the meristematic regions, whereas animals grow up to a certain age and after that they stop growing. Then cell division only occurs in the damaged and worn off cells to repair them. Some non-living objects also grow, but that is external. Growth occurs by the accumulation of substances on its surface. For example, hills, mountains, rocks and sand mounds do grow, but the growth is external or extrinsic, and that is termed as accretion. But living organisms grow internally, or they show intrinsic growth. Therefore, growth is a characteristic feature of living organisms, but it is not a defining feature because there are some exceptions to this case. The second point is reproduction. All living organisms reproduce. Reproduction is the production of offsprings that are more or less similar to their parents. Now we are discussing about sexual mode of reproduction. The higher organisms reproduce sexually and the lower organisms reproduce asexually. For example, fungi reproduces by asexual spores, yeast and hydra reproduces by budding, planaria reproduces by regeneration, that is, if a part of its body is cut accidentally, then it regrows to form a new organism, and some algae, they reproduce by fragmentation. So, reproduction is seen in all the living organisms. But there are some exceptions to this case too. Mules, sterile worker bees, infertile human couples are unable to reproduce. So can we term them as non-living objects? Of course not. They are living but they are unable to reproduce. A mule is the progeny of the female horse and the male donkey. A hinny is the progeny of the male horse and the female donkey. A liger is the progeny of the male lion and the female tiger. A tigon is the progeny of the male tiger and the female lion. So they are all infertile, but they are living. Therefore, reproduction is also a characteristic feature of life, but it is not a defining feature. The next point is metabolism. All the organisms are made up of chemicals. They produce various types of biomolecules. There are various types of reactions going on inside our bodies. They are called the chemical reactions or the metabolic reactions. Metabolism is a sum total of catabolism and anabolism. Let me explain these two terms. When smaller molecules combine together in the presence of energy to produce a bigger molecule, that is called an anabolic process or an anabolic reaction. For example, in case of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water combines together in the presence of solar energy to produce the glucose molecule. So this is an anabolic reaction. When a bigger molecule breaks down to form smaller molecules and releases energy during the process, that is called catabolism. For example, during respiration, glucose molecule breaks down to form carbon dioxide and water to release energy in the form of ATP. So this is a catabolic reaction. There are various types of reactions going on inside our body, or various types of chemical reactions that includes both anabolic as well as catabolic reactions. Like the proteins are broken down to form amino acids by digestion. Even amino acids group together to form proteins. So anabolic as well as catabolic reactions are going on inside our body. And this is a characteristic feature of living organisms only. Metabolism is only seen in living organisms. Some pharmacists and biologists, they also carry out these reactions out of the cell in the lab conditions, but they will be termed as living reactions, not living organisms. Therefore, we can say that metabolism is a defining feature of life. The fourth point is consciousness. Every organism is conscious about the environment. They are aware of what is going on around them. They can respond to the stimulus like light, touch, sound, pain, pressure, etc. Right from the simplest organism to the highest organism, all have this property of consciousness. The amoeba can recognize its food and then they can capture it because of consciousness. Even the porifera or the sponges, they can also identify the food and then capture it. So they all have the property of consciousness. But humans are slightly different and slightly modified than the other organisms because they have consciousness as well as self-consciousness. They are aware of themselves, about how they look, about what they should wear, and so on. Therefore, we can consider consciousness as a defining property of life. Now we are going to discuss about diversity of life on the earth. Biodiversity refers to the number and type of organisms present on the earth. Till date, 1.7 to 1.8 million species are known, and there are many more species that are not yet discovered. In order to make the study of organisms easier, there are a few steps that needs to be followed. The first one is identification. First of all, when an organism is seen, it needs to be observed carefully and the features needs to be noted down. The features like whether they are soft-bodied or rough-bodied, whether they have 2 or 4 legs, whether the body is filled with feathers or scales or spines, etc. That is identification. The second point is giving it a particular name or nomenclature. Now, why do you think this step is essential? It is because an organism is known by various names all over the world. That becomes very confusing to study the organism. Therefore, a standard name is provided to the organism so that it is known by the same name all over the world. This is called nomenclature. Nomenclature, or giving a name to an organism, is done by a set of rules that is given in ICBN, that is International Code for Botanical Nomenclature for Plants, and ICZN, that is International Code for Zoological Nomenclature for Animals. Naming of the organism is done by a particular system called the binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is providing a name to an organism with 2 parts. The first part is the genus name and the second part is the species name. For example, the scientific name of mango is Mangifera indica. So Mangifera is the genus name and indica is the species name. While writing scientific names, there are some points that needs to be kept in mind. The first one is, while writing a scientific name, we must underline the parts separately. And if it is handwritten, if it is typed, then or printed, then it should be italicized to denote its Latin origin. All the scientific names are written in Latin language because Latin is no longer in use, so that it is not modified or it is not changed in future. The second point is the genus name should start with the capital letter and the species name should start with the small letter. The third point is sometimes the scientist who gives the name to that organism, his name is abbreviated at the end. For example, Mangifera indica Linn. Linnaeus gave the name to mango, so his name is abbreviated at the end. The third step is classification. Since there are millions of species, it is not at all feasible to study them one by one. Therefore, the organisms are categorized into various groups and then they are studied. So that is known as classification. All these categories are called taxa. An arrangement of the taxa at various levels is known as taxonomy. Systematics is a branch of biology that deals with taxonomy as well as evolutionary relationships between the organisms. Systematics is a systematic arrangement of organisms. The word systematics came from the word systema, that is in Latin language. Carolus Linnaeus, he described about systematics in his publication Systema Naturae. So it showed about evolutionary relationship among animals. Now, or among organisms. Let's take an example to denote what is that. If we take the example of a fish, a human, and a gorilla, and we try to find out which is closely related. Now, the human is having external ears. Gorilla is also having external ears, but the fish does not. Human has hair all over its body. Gorilla also has hair all over its body, but the fish does not. The human has sweat glands. Gorilla also has sweat glands, but the fish does not. So, this shows that gorilla is a close relative of the human, but the fish is not. So, this is all described in systematics.